بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا مولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا، اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك آمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام شيخ.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
كيف حالكم؟
الحمد
الحمد
لله.
لله.
الحمد لله.
Good, alhamdulillah. Maybe before I start the lesson, I don't know if Mona Zakaria perhaps spoke to you about the MJC and the elections and so on. Did he speak to you about it?
No,
About bid'ah.
Sorry? Okay.
Read the hadith concerning bid'ah.
Okay, the hadith concerning bid'ah. Okay, so Bismillah. So I think maybe I just want to mention one or two points with regard to the MJC, and I think that in our community there are people who are supporters of the MJC and recognize their value, and there are members who are ardent detractors of the MJC and oppose them at every front. And I think in the middle, there are people who recognize the good of the MJC and also see some of the shortcomings and the challenges within the organization. And I think the middle position for me is a much more balanced position because it's based on evidence. Like as most things, as you know, with the teachers, is that things are based on evidence, and we have a balanced view with regard to things. So I just wanted to make a few points because obviously with elections now, people have lots of things to say up and down with regard to the MJC. So let me make a few points. I think the first thing is that the MJC is an old organization. I think it's now about 75 years old, and it's one of the longer lasting the bodies that have survived the test of time, and many other bodies, ulama bodies, have come and gone, and they may exist in name but they don't exist in function. But the MJC, alhamdulillah, is still in a sense well supported by the ulama and recognized by the ulama and by the community in general, and it's in a sense stood the test of time. It has a long history, and maybe some elements of the history are controversial as well, but I want to focus on its current function. I don't want to go back into history and unpack all of that. I want to focus on its current function. So I think first of all is that from the positive side, and I must emphasize these positive aspects, the one thing that the MJC does, and it does it relatively well, is that it serves as a body where ulama can come together and coordinate and speak despite different backgrounds. And I think that's, for me, a very, very, very positive thing. I think you would not find that same type of structure almost anywhere in the world, where ulama of so many diverse backgrounds can come to one platform and agree and disagree, but there is still civility and there is still some degree of coordination and some degree of unity. And remember, unity doesn't mean conformity. We might have our own views, but unity means that we have a respectful difference. And I think that's a very, very positive thing, because if we didn't have that, say we took the MJC away and you have 200-300 ulama with no coordinating council, then you're going to have 200-300 voices all calling out to the public, all making videos and pamphlets and khutbahs, and this one speaking about this one, and it'll become more chaotic for the Muslim community. So in that function alone, that it coordinates the ulama to a large extent, not obviously everybody buys into it, but to a large extent, I think that's a very positive aspect. The second thing is that the MJC is in a sense judicial in nature. It's called the Muslim Judicial Council. So judicial means it is responsible for aspects of Islamic law, and aspects of Islamic law will include fatwa, legal rulings on questions the community have, and that the benefit there is that you have a central body which is thinking and addressing and studying and researching questions and producing answers with the input of other members of the ulama fraternity, and you have a more coordinated answer as opposed to one or two independent people just giving answers. So it's a much more rigorous and robust process, and a much more there's more buy-in to that process. So it gives judicial answers, and it's involved in some functional aspects of law, especially with nikah and fasakh and talaq and so on. So it's involved in some of those aspects of law, which the community does require in terms of like basic stuff, like what is the nisab, what is going to be the fidya level, the fitra level, all of those kind of legal guidance that the community needs. It is much better done in a coordinated judicial council as opposed to individual ulama giving different answers. So those are amongst its many benefits, and also it serves as a coordination point for Muslims when they engage with outside structures like foreign dignitaries, like the government, local and national government. It's an interface. It's an interface. I personally don't feel that the MJC claims to be the leader or representative of the Muslim community. I think that's probably debatable, but it represents a portion of the Muslim community, namely its ulama, and whoever follow those ulama, it represents that portion. But there are obviously other factors in the community, and I don't think it claims to be the representative like a khalifa, like the ruler of the Muslim community. I think that's a misplaced understanding of who the organization is. And then the organization also does a fair degree of outreach and community development and just like the basic service of the community. The MJC, through its imams, do a lot of services to the community, and one has to appreciate the dedication to go to the opening of these events, to make du'as at these places, to give nasiha here. It's can be tedious and it's hard work, and it's often thankless work, and it's not easy space to be. And the MJC does do that, alhamdulillah. So in those respects, I think there's a lot of positives with regard to it. In terms of negatives, there might be some valid criticism, and people might, I mean, I think this in your organization, there's definitely room for improvement. There's definitely room for leadership development. There's definitely room for expansion of services, deepening of services. I think those are all valid concerns. But I think it's important to have a balanced perspective of who the body is and see its pros and see its challenges, and have like a fair, let's call it a fair judgment on it. And one organization will never, ever, ever be all things to all people. And I don't think it's expected to be that. I think different organizations serve different roles. And I think that's just, I wanted to share those, that my thoughts on that. And it's also, in the end, it's a democratic organization. And it's also an association of ulama. So people were also, there was a lot of calls for, why doesn't the public vote for the MJC president? For me, it doesn't really make sense. It's almost like you have the Islamic Medical Association. Those are association of medical doctors. You have the Muslim Lawyers Association. It's an association of Muslim lawyers. And this association of ulama who choose its representative. So every organization has its own rules of access and participation. We're not speaking about the president of a country, which is a very different kind of context. It is a president of an ulama body, which the ulama would elect, and it's a very democratic process. I mean, it's completely democratic. Anybody who fits the criteria can run for any position, and it's completely a vote in secret and with the proper electoral committee, and people vote. And with any election, there are dynamics, there are lobby groups, there are different 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 candidates, different interests, and but in the end, the ulama vote, and that is how the MJC leadership is established. So it's a very democratic organization, and one has to respect that it does adhere to its processes. So those are just my thoughts. I thought I'd share with you, and maybe we can open the floor, not for long, maybe for like 5 minutes, if there are any particular questions that you have or some things concerning you, inshallah. And obviously, this is a private gathering in a sense, so we have that respect for this majlis as well. Or you guys all fine?
Jazakallah khair, Malana, for that info. It was very informative, alhamdulillah, because what we found is that people just follow blindly. They don't have the history and they don't have the understanding, but then they just follow blindly. So shukran for the info.
Okay, alhamdulillah. And I think there's also a platform where I want us, if you do have concerns, to share it as well, you do have questions, to share it. I don't at all claim to represent the MJC or speak on behalf of them, but at all. I'm just saying, as a, let's call it, a regular member of the MJC and my perception of it, I think it's important just to kind of clear the air, because sometimes like things like people like often speak without any context and without any insight into what's going on, or just like general framework and so on. And so, there are other questions or concerns or anything?
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
No, I just thought it just interesting. I thought maybe at perhaps now with the social media and how easy it is to share certain things. I just find it interesting that often people in Cape Town also just share like ulama body fatwas from perhaps other provinces and so on. You know, like maybe they don't have full confidence in the MJCs, or they prefer another ulama body, so they share those things. And it's just interesting to note, because I mean that's allowed, right? It's fine. But I mean, if there was perhaps more clearer, or the MJC had a better sort of maybe like a PR or marketing campaign to sort of clarify some of the, like Molana said now, their role, then perhaps more people would feel more confident in sharing things and referencing the MJC, perhaps. Just a thought.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, the first thing I want to speak about is that, or to mention on your comment, is that for me, it's some ulama, but it's not ulama, but some ulama, but is one person, and they give themselves a name. Like, if I want to consider, if I want to make myself ulama body, I can give myself a nice fancy title, and I can call myself the Ulama Union of South Africa, and I can have no members there and start make a letter and a logo and start issuing statements on WhatsApp. And then everybody says, wow, the Ulama Union of South Africa has issued this fatwa. But who's the mufti? Who are the members? What's the track record? What's the history? And I think that's what I'm worried about, this kind of just sharing of things. Like where does it emanate from? Because some of the positions that have been shared within our community are like unacceptable positions. Really, they're unacceptable positions that have been shared, and therefore the importance of the MJC, because it is a moderating force. In other words, it's a force of reliable authority. And you may disagree here and there, but I'm saying it's a force of reliable authority. In other words, it has a mufti which is agreed upon by the ulama of Cape Town. It has a fatwa committee which is agreed upon. It has a majlis. It has a membership of hundreds of imams which discuss these issues and have the chance to debate these issues. So there's rigor within the positions. And sometimes people just make a letter and they say they're ulama body, and it's just destructive. And I think definitely that the MJC could do some more marketing in terms of its value, and people also must see that value as well. That because just it creates confusion when there's just so many fatwas flying around. Well, Sunir, bismillah.
Shukran, Mulana.
So far as, sorry.
I think maybe you mentioned it from a PR point of view. I think maybe there needs to be more to clarify its mandate, because I think ultimately its title is given to that you would think that it's a national organization, but its mandate is almost limited towards Western Cape. And I think also what needs to be done is maybe there needs to be a little more, I don't know which organization needs to, but maybe from the side of the MGC, is to consolidate, because there's a lot of differing views, and it creates a lot of differences amongst people in different provinces, different groups, and there's a lot of these different conflicting sometimes messages that comes out from these different ulama boards. I've noticed recently when there's been any communication, I think from UXA, it will say that this view is not supported, maybe from the ulama board in KZN, and it creates a lot of disunity amongst the Muslims, not only in Cape Town, because now we've got a lot of people that have moved into Cape Town, and will not necessarily rely on anything that comes out from the MJC unless it's supported, that message is supported from an ulama board from where they previously came from. So it does create a lot of differences, and sometimes a lot of this conflict can be managed a bit differently.
Yes, yes, yes. So I think with regard to the first comment with the MJC, I think MJC generally operates in Cape Town, and it largely represents the ulama of Cape Town, but it does have a, let's call it a national standing in terms of its history, in terms of its prominence. So it definitely has like a very strong voice. But the official national body would be UXA that we consider, which the MJC is a member of, and there's like many other members of UXA. And UXA would be a national coordinating body. And at present, the president of UXA is always from the MJC. The president of UXA is always from the MJC because the Cape Townians know how to keep the peace, I suppose. But and I think that's a positive thing as well. The thing that you can have an umbrella body that incorporates MJC and Jamiatul Ulama South Africa and Jamiatul Ulama KZN, that you can have one body that coordinates them, which is very, very helpful. And also that if there is one body that doesn't agree with the statement, it's also very, for me, it's fine to say these all bodies agree with the statement, however one doesn't subscribe. So in other words, we respect the ikhtilaf, and we have a majority position, and we have a minority which opposes it. And that's fine as well, because we can't always get everybody on the same page on every single issue. And I think that the fact that we can still be at the same table, that for me is very positive. That's for me very, very positive. And there have been now ulama who don't want to come to the table, who outright call MJC and many other groups to be even sometimes non-Muslims or hypocrites, and this unhelpful language. But alhamdulillah, the center still holds that most of the ulama can still come to one table, inshallah. Doctor, I think you want to mention something?
I wanted to say, in spite of all the positive and the negative aspects of the Muslim Judicial Council, this is one body which demands quite a bit of respect from the other religious organizations and from the governments, national and the local government. They do see to MJC to give them an idea or a direction in which they are moving. Is that proper to go about, or should they rather do it some other way? Such as closing down of the masajid. There were several issues on which, rightly or wrongly, they took a decision, and which was something that the Ummah and the masajid, and especially the imams at the masajid, could take a direction.
Yes, yes, yes. So definitely there is recognition from the civil society as well as local government, and even also from international governments, international bodies. There is a lot of recognition for the MJC in terms of its role. And sometimes people have an issue with that recognition. And it's not always, I don't think that's always a fair statement. Like if the ulama organize themselves and they have a constitution and they have elections and they have a functioning body, is it fair to say, but why am I not part of the body as a business person or as the relief organization? Is it, I mean, is it, I'm not sure if that's a fair statement. One could say that we need a more representative body. That's a different statement altogether. But you can't necessarily criticize the ulama body for not having non-ulama in that sense. So I think that's a bit of a discussion that needs to be dealt with in a nuanced way, inshallah. Any other questions or comments?
Maulana, Assalamu alaikum. I think my comment, I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that in the context of what's happening in our community and in our society, there is a lot more than that's required maybe from the MJC, and they're called upon to participate in a lot more different spaces. And in the context where everybody begins to act or request a lot more from the MJC, sometimes and sometimes in terms of structuring itself, maybe the MJC needs a bit more. Like, I mean, we would call it improving the way they engage with stakeholders. So while you don't want the businessman to be on the MJC because there's no place for him there, but there is a role that the MJC could play in reaching out, in talking to them, in communicating certain things. And maybe that's where I think people in more formal organizations, businesses or other, they have certain words for these things, a stakeholder management plan, or whatever the case may be. And people coming into our city, or coming into the sphere of influence of the MJC, they tend to have certain expectations of how that must play out. I think sometimes it may be good to hear what that expectations are, and to see if the MJC could meet it, because at the end of the day, the MJC needs to talk to its stakeholders as well.
Yes. So
And
I mean, I fully agree with you on the stakeholder engagement. I think the issue sometimes for me is that I definitely agree there needs to be broad engagement from the MJC. The question sometimes is the onus of that lies on who. Do you know what I mean? Like if the business
Yes.
community wants to be engaged, in my engaging with the MJC, I've never, and I have limited engagement with him. I'm not an active part of the actual structure, but they would be very open to any constructive engagement with anybody. I mean, they deal with multi-faith organizations, they deal with civil society, they deal with national government, they deal with international delegations. When they are approached, they are open to being approached. And
Yes.
sometimes we almost like they must engage the business community, but who are the business community? Who are the legal society? Who are the humanitarian organizations? Like the MJC cannot be responsible for coordinating bodies outside its control. The bodies outside control needs to coordinate themselves and engage with the MJC. And I think that's also an important statement, that we don't have those bodies like we don't have a body that coordinates our relief organizations. We don't have a body that coordinates our business, and that fault actually lies with those bodies as well, because you cannot coordinate when you're not organized, and you cannot engage when you're not organized. And I think people need to, for me, actually, what I see is I actually see, and it's very interesting, I actually see the MJC as one of the most organized organizations, because it has organized its constituents of ulama very well.
Yes.
And
Sorry, I agree with you. In fact, I think my perspective is that insofar as meeting their objective and what they were created for, and in terms of where they currently see themselves with the level of skills that they have within, they are focused on that. And I think they're doing I'm not in a position to judge actually, but I think from my perspective, they're doing a good job. The people outside who have issues with that needs to come forward and say, how do we help you get to this point, if that is where they want it? So I agree with you. I think it's not necessarily their perspective.
And my question is, like, have they engaged? Because I think that like one thing that's really, like, you know, when you work in the community field for a long time, what really gets to you is armchair critics. And it's like, in a sense, you know, you make sabr with it. People people have a lot of ideas, but I mean, I have people engage, I have people put together project plans and business plans and approach the MJC and ask them for their support. You know, I don't think it's no one's going to be close to anything that's going to be a benefit to the community.
Yes,
and I think that, you know, that's what I'm saying. Like, sometimes for me, like, has there been movement on these issues, whether it's youth, whether it's business development, whether it's skills development? There's so many aspects of community needs, and again, I don't feel the MJC is going to be the provider of. The MJC is not going to do economic development. They're not going to do substantial poverty relief. They're not going to do a lot of youth development. It's just they don't have the capacity for it. But they would generally, in my understanding, support anybody who's willing to get in those spaces. But people can sit back and say, yeah, the MJC doesn't do any youth development. No, they don't do any economic development. They don't do any, but they're not designed for that. They're a judicial committee, council.
Yes.
And my encouragement always to Mizan students is become active in your community, because it's one thing talking, it's another thing doing.
Yes.
Inshallah.
Yes.
And if anybody gets stuck, they can come to me as well, and I can use whatever influence I have to try to assist. Inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions or comments? And as somebody who's, in a sense, I'm a member, but I'm not a, let's call it a uncritical member. I mean, I see the shortcomings as well. I see immense positives, and I see also many challenges, and I have a balanced view about it. And I think I'm just calling upon the Mizan students, first of all, and by the community, to have a balanced view of the good and to see the challenges, and where there are challenges, to be of assistance and contribution and development of solutions, not just armchair critics, because that's like a cop out. For me, that's a cop out. People saying, having all the answers in theory but not doing anything. I mean, I have 1,000 answers in theory, but it's actually very hard to execute many of these things. Okay, so I'm not trying to be make you into followers, or if I'm trying to give a balanced perspective, inshallah. Any other last comment or question, and then we can carry on, inshallah. Okay, I think we are all covered, inshallah. But if you have any concerns and questions, the classes are open space. You don't have to always agree with everything. It's just it's important to bring these discussions to the fore, because they are of consequence for our organization. And also, I think also a lot of people have been asking, why aren't the young ulama coming to the leadership and taking the fore? I think within any long-standing organization, change is often a gradual process, and things happen in their own time as well. Sometimes in our minds we can see the end result and what should be the real picture, but to get there takes time as well. And and it's not also an easy space to operate. I must say that like I have many young ulama friends who are very capable, and it's not an easy space to be in. It's a much easier space to be like this, teaching a class and having your own space and just this is your life. It's a much easier life. It's much harder to bear the brunt of the pressures of the community. That's a much harder space to be in, because once you're in that space, you have guaranteed enemies and you have guaranteed pressures, and you have just it's a very difficult space to operate in. And therefore, not even myself, I mean, it's like it's hard to think about. I mean, it's a different type of life and dedication, and therefore I respect the people who do take that plunge and make it their life, because it's in a many sense it's actually like a thankless job to be in the center of that attention and that expectation and bear the criticism all the time. It's not an easy space to be in. So alhamdulillah, I'm happy here with Mizan. Alhamdulillah. So let's bismillah, let's get back to the Quran. Alhamdulillah. So a'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. We'll just do a few verses today, and in the last section Allah spoke about some of the ayat. Allah spoke about Fir'aun, and after the story of Fir'aun, Allah says, أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاء بَنَاهَا. Are you more difficult, more greater in creation, or the earth? بَنَاهَا, He has built it, He has constructed it. رَفَعَ سَمْكَهَا فَسَوَّاهَا, He has raised its ceilings, its heights. فَسَوَّاهَا, and He has evened it. وَأَغْطَشَ لَيْلَهَا, and He has darkened its night. وَأَخْرَجَ ضُحَاهَا, and He has brought forth its morning light. وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا, and the earth after that He has spread it. أَخْرَجَ مِنْهَا مَاءَهَا وَمَرْعَاهَا, He has brought forth from the earth its water and its pasture. وَالْجِبَالَ أَرْسَاهَا, and its mountains He has anchored. مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ, as a provision for you and for your cattle. So Allah speaks about these ayat, as we mentioned, as evidence of His creative ability, and if He's able to create such significant creation, such immense creation, surely He is able to recreate all of us once again to account to Him on the day of Qiyamah. Then verse number 34 starts a new theme, which is actually reverting again to the theme of the actual Qiyamah. And so we'll tie the themes to each other at the end of the surah. But Allah says, فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى. فَإِذَا. So what does إِذَا mean? فَإِذَا means
When?
So when?
When for when? When for the past or the future?
For the
Future.
future.
One
Future.
when for the future. فإذا. So when جاءت الطامة الكبرى. What does جاءت mean?
It comes. Well,
To come. In other words, when someone is at a certain place A, and they're coming towards you or towards place B, it's almost like someone who is arriving, someone who is coming, someone who is arriving. So in the sense, Allah is using this idea of a being arriving. Allah is using it for tamma. The fa'il for ja'at is tammatu, because ja'a is he is arriving, ja'at she is arriving, and the she here refers to tamma. So what does tamma mean? What does tamma mean? Anybody?
Catastrophe.
It means what? A catastrophe. What else can it mean?
Overwhelming calamity.
An overwhelming calamity. So a tama is something, I was reading about it here. A tama is something which is overwhelming and something which covers everything else. And a tama, in a sense, is something, when you think of something overwhelming, in a sense, you don't have an analogy for it. So in other words, something which you have an analogy in your mind for it already, it's not that overwhelming. For example, let's say um, there's a rainstorm, and then you experience a rainstorm, and then the next day you experience a very severe rainstorm. The very severe rainstorm is not really that overwhelming, because you've already had an understanding of a rainstorm and an experience of a rainstorm. And this might be a little bit more severe, but it doesn't overwhelm your being. So something truly overwhelming is something which you have almost no analogy for. So, for example, say we had a storm here and the water rose to above a double-story height. Just imagine we had a flood like that. That would be overwhelming, because within our frame of reference and experience, we don't really have an example of that in terms of our actual lived experience. So that would be something which is even more overwhelming, because now we have a flood until our roof level. And as you go more and more severe, the less and less analogous it becomes to your own experience, the more and more overwhelming it becomes. If that makes sense. So al-tama is something which is there's no analogy for it. And there's also it says مأخوذ من طم الماء. It comes from the idea where you say طم الماء is where water basically completely covers everything, like it floods everything, completely covers everything. It completely overwhelms everything. So it's like in a physical sense, when water floods something and covers something, that is طم الماء. But in a metaphorical sense, when you are overwhelmed, is something which you have not experienced something like this before. So فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ. So when comes in the future الطَّامَّةُ, this completely overwhelming, unprecedented event that has no analogy for it. And Allah adds al-kubra. Al-kubra. Al-kubra means like the great, the major, overwhelming event. And which event is this? This event obviously is the event of the events of the last day, of the destruction of the earth, of the resurrection, of the standing before Allah Ta'ala. That's going to be the Tammatul Kubra. Is the word Ja'at past or present? And does it refer to past or present?
It's past tense.
it's normally past tense.
Okay, and does it refer to the past or the present?
It's referring to the
Or the future?
future.
Future.
The future.
Referring, it's a past tense verb, Ja'at, Ja'a, and the present tense will be Yaji'u, or female will be Taji'u. So Allah is using a past tense verb to refer to a future tense, and we mentioned this many times before in our classes, is that often when Allah speaks to a event in the future, Allah uses a past tense verb for more emphasis. Meaning what? That future event is it it as if it has occurred already. It's so certain that it's as if it has occurred already. So this is going to be فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ. In other جاءت, there is a past tense verb, but we translate it as when will come, when will arrive. What? الطَّامَّة, the overwhelming event. Al-Kubra, the great overwhelming event. And it's going to be so certain, it's as if it has happened already. يَوْمَ يَتَذَكَّرُ الْإِنسَانُ مَا سَعَى. يَوْمَ, on that day, the day of يتذكر. In other words, the yawma you can see is light there. In a sense, it's a mudaf, but the mudaf in ilayh, it takes the form of a verb. Because normally mudaf in ilayh is jar, it has a ism jar, but here it takes the form of a verb. So the yawma there is definite. The day that, the day of يتذكر الإنسان. Second years. Bismillah. يتذكر is the what of the what verb?
Fifth bab,
Fifth verb. Good. The what of the fifth verb?
the mudari verb.
The mudari verb. Good. What's the quality of the fifth verb?
Let me check my notes, man.
Check quickly, inshallah. Who was our brother Sunir? What's the quality of the
Reflective,
fifth verb?
supposed to the doer, to learn, graduality, or new meaning.
Okay, so what's the first one you mentioned?
Reflective to the doer.
It's causative to the doer, it's inflection. In other words, you're doing it to yourself. So what does yatadhakkaru then mean? Dhikr means to remind, to remember. So who's going to remind who?
To remind.
Yawma yatadhakkaru, in other words, on that day, yatadhakkaru means you cause yourself to remind, reflexive, yes. You cause yourself to remind. On that day, yatadhakkaru will be reminded, will cause themselves to remember. Al-insanu, humankind, mankind will cause themselves to remember, will be made to remember. What will they be made to remember? Ma. So yatadhakkaru is the fi'l on the fifth bab. The fa'il is insan. And what will human beings remember or cause themselves to remember? They will cause themselves to remember ma sa'a. So that ma there is actually the maf'ulun bihi. That which sa'a. What does sa'a mean?
The time.
No, sa'a is an hour, yes, but what does sa'a mean?
Strive, which is strive.
Strive.
Has the
Strive.
word sa'a come already?
Yes, Maulana, it came in verse 22.
Good. Thumma adabara yas'a. Then he, Fir'aun, adabara, he turned his back, yas'a, striving, moving, actively struggling against. So often a surah will actually repeat its words. It's one of the elements that actually makes the Quran a bit easy to understand, is that it is a repetition of root letters. So on that day, so sa'a, and you can think of it as a sa'i between Safa and Marwa. As you exert yourself, you strive to go from one mountaintop to the other hilltop, back and forth 7 times. This is the striving. So on that day, yatadhakkaru will bring to mind, will bring to remember. Al-insan, human beings will be made to remember ma, that which sa'a, that which they strove for. That which he strove for. In other words, that which he had lived. Because say you die when you're 80, 90 years old or 75 years old, you may forget much of your life. You may forget much of what happened in your life. And the day of Qiyamah, it all comes back. The book of deeds are open, the angels testify, the earth testifies, our limbs testify, and everything comes flooding back. There's no escape from the consequence of Qiyamah. And people will be made to remember whatever they had done in this life, which is actually a scary thought to think about that. And therefore we have to be in abundant istighfar and tawbah, so that those sins can be washed and they can be wiped away. وَبُرْزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِمَنْ يَرَى بَرَّزَ يُبَرِّزُ. Second is what bab is barraza on?
Second bab.
Second bab, barraza. And we haven't done this maybe in detail, but if you want to make a verb, a past tense verb, majhul, in the passive voice, what you do is you make the first letter a dhamma and the second letter a kasra. Like what? Khalaqa. When I make it majhul, make the first letter dhamma, khu, second letter kasra, li, qa. Daraba, duriba. Nasara, nusira. Excuse me. So barraza, burriza. And what does burriza mean? What does burriza mean? I'm sure you look up these words before you come to class. Anybody? Barraza, yeah. Second, first bab, to come, to show, to appear, to come to view. Second bab, barraza, to cause, to come out, to bring
Manifest.
out, to expose, to show. Manifest could be one of those words. So if that is the ma'lu meaning, the active voice, how do you say burrizat? If barraza means he or it manifested, he or it brought out, brought forth, how do you translate burrizat?
Will be made to be manifested.
Yeah.
Yes. So it
To
will
make
be
it.
made. So what will be made to be manifest? Remember, burrizatil jahim. So now we don't have the fa'il now. We have the what in Arabic we call the naibul fa'il. If we haven't done it before, it's fine. But how do you translate burrizatil jahim?
Janam, the hellfire will be made to be manifested.
Good. So the hellfire will be made to be manifested. It will be shown. It will be brought forth on the day of Qiyamah. Burrizat means when something is like, maybe you didn't see it before, but now it's going to be brought forth. It's going to become prominent. It's going to become manifest. Wa burzatil jahimu. And jahim is referring to the hellfire. And jahim is generally a fire that it has a very deep pit. A very deep pit and a very huge fire. So when you think of a deep pit and a huge fire, you think of lots of fuel. Because you want to make a big fire in a pit, you add lots and lots of fuel and you light it up and it becomes a huge fire. So that is jahim. It is that the blaze that is deep and it is immense. And that blaze that is deep and that is immense, it will be brought forth liman yara, liman for the person, yara that sees, for the onlooker, for the one that sees when on the day of Qiyamah, they will see this jahim. And again, we notice that the word burrizat is a maldi verb, but used for the future. Again, because it is there for certainty. فأما من طغى وآثر الحياة الدنيا فإن الجحيم هي المأوى. فأما, so أما, as for the one, man, the one that طغى. But Sunil, is that a new hand or old hand?
It's a new one, Mulana. Just want to check the Burizati is feminine because of the Jahim having the feminine quality or being
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Burza is feminine because Jahim is feminine because Jahim refers to Nar. Excellent. فأما من طغى, as fa, so amma, as for, amma means as for, man, the one that طغى. What does the word طغى mean? Did the word طغى come before? Somehow I remember it coming in the surah. Am I mistaken? اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. So now we can see we have a case study of Fir'aun, a human example case study from history of someone that طغى, and now we have the concept of someone that طغى. So in other words, Fir'aun is going to be like a case study, a marker in actual life, and here Allah is speaking about a person who follows in the mold and the shape and the way of Fir'aun. فَأَمَّا, as for the one, man طغى, the one that transgressed. And that's also the way of tying the theory of the future or the news of the future to the actuality of the past. فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى, as for the one that طَغَى, that has transgressed. Transgress means transgress the limits set by Allah Ta'ala. وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. What's the meaning of آثَرَ? Anybody?
Prefer.
To prefer. Good. So when you prefer something, what does it imply? How many things are there when you prefer something?
You have a
Two or
choice
more.
between two.
Yeah, you have
So they must,
choices.
they must have two or more things. And then can you have both things?
No, when you have a preference, you are leaning to one specific.
Okay, so good. So generally when you prefer something, there's generally two or more things, and generally you have to make a choice. Like, would you prefer some tea or some coffee? You don't want the tea and coffee together. You want either the tea or the coffee. So you have to it's between one or two things. Allah only mentioned one thing here. Allah says, وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. And so the one that tagha, that has transgressed, and athara, he or she, this person has preferred, has given preference to what? Al-hayata ad-dunya. What type of construction is al-hayata ad-dunya? Al-hayata ad-dunya.
Sifa Mawsuf.
It's a
Is
sifa
mudaf
mawsuf.
from
Not mudaf. Remember, mudaf doesn't have an
Sufa
al.
Musu.
yes,
Remember, a mudaf can't have an al. So this is sifa and mawsuf. So al-hayat means what?
life.
The life.
Life, from the word hayy. Hayy. Allah, one of Allah's names is al-hayy, the ever living. So hayat means life. What does ad-dunya mean?
The earth.
Okay, ard will be more earth. So what does
Oh.
dunya mean?
World.
Worldly life.
World means worldly, but what does the word dana actually mean?
Low, isn't it like from
You're right, Karam?
That which is close.
Okay, so dana means that which is low and that which is close. So dana is that which is low and that which is close. So dana, like danaya means to be near, to be close, to come close to. The word here to be low, to be lowly, mean, base, vile, despicable, contemptible. So the word dunya means that which is low in terms of the hierarchy of existence in one sense, because that which is in the afterlife, which is raised, which is manifestly better, whereas this dunya is something which is low. Second meaning also is that it's close. In other words, it is that which is immediate to us. It is the seen world, so it is close to us, and the unseen world is far from us. And so therefore this hayat dunya means this worldly life, this close life, this temporary life, this low life, this low level of living as well. وآثر الحياة الدنيا. So when we say athara, we mean a choice. So where's the other half of the choice? Where's the other half of the choice?
The akhirah.
is it implied?
It's implied. In other words, the implication is وآثر الحياة الدنيا على الآخرة. The one that chooses the worldly life, the lower life, above the afterlife, over the afterlife, in preference to the afterlife. They commit and invest and make their choices for the benefit of this life at the expense of the afterlife. So that is implied. وآثر, and they have given preference to al-hayat ad-dunya, because Allah is speaking about the afterlife. But their preference has been for the hayat ad-dunya, for the low, close life. فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Then verily Jahim, al-Jahim, the fire, the blaze, هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. It will, she, referring to Jahim, which means, remember, the deep pit full of flames. It will be al-Ma'wa. What does Ma'wa mean?
Abode.
Refuge.
It means a abode can be one meaning, but what does the meaning of awa mean?
Refuge.
A refuge. So a refuge is somewhere where you take rest, where you escape to. And it's almost like an ironic use, because normally you think of ma'wa as a safe place, the place that you're going to end up in, you're going to take refuge in, you're going to take protection in, you're going to live in. And Allah is
Shelter.
saying that you're going to shelter in, that the jahim, that the only place to go for the person who has transgressed and who has given preference to this life, that the only place to take shelter and refuge and protection and reside in is going to be the jahim. There's nothing else. There's no other option. The person is forced to take refuge within the jahim. May Allah protect us. Wa amma, as for the one,
Amen.
man, the one who khafa maqama rabbihi. Khafa, what does the meaning of khafa?
Fear.
Fear. And khafa is it is a fear which is it's like a physical fear. You get like an intellectual fear, like khashiyah would be intellectual fear. You get the idea of taqwa, which also like is in a sense like intellectual fear, a fear based out of knowledge, whereas khafa is actually a physical fear. You physically fear maqama rabbi. So maqam is an interesting word, because maqam can hold actually one of two meanings. What's the root letters of maqam?
Is it qaf, wow,
Well,
meme?
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
qaf, wow, mim. Qaf, wow, mim. And so it's hard to see there what is the actual pattern of maqam. What type of like fa'ala pattern is it on? I'll give you a tip. You can swap out the alif for the wow. Anybody?
Is it not kataba?
So what I'm saying, so is it like maf'ul? Is it fa'il? Like what is it? Because it's a bit difficult.
Madi.
It's a bit of difficult one to see. So let me help you. It's an interesting one, because the word
Just the master.
It's a noun.
Is it the master?
just you must give it to me. Must give it to me. The what is it? The fa'ala. What fa'ala? Is it maf'ul? Is it fa'il? Is it on the mazid fi? What is it? It's actually the maf'al pattern. Maf'al pattern. Anyone want to help me tell me what does the maf'al pattern represent? Anybody? Dawrah year students, you must know.
Masdar of the first bab.
Not master of the second. The master of the first part doesn't have a pattern. Maf'al is what? Maf'al is what? Sister Nuran, is Sister Nuran in class today? It's not in class today. And who else can I ask here? Maf'al.
Sister Nuran and Sister Sabira are not here, Marina.
And Sister Sabira not here. Subhanallah. Is anybody else answering? Where's the brothers? Okay. I'll help you out. It's Ismul Makan.
Is it a place? The Mal'an.
Ziyad, too late. I release Ismul Makan Ziyad. It's a place, yes. So that is Ismul Makan. Ismul Makan means if it's on Maf'al and some others, but Maf'al, it's going to be a Ismul Makan. So how do I put qawama onto Maf'al?
Maqwam.
Maqwam becomes Maqwan. Okay, let me just do a simple example just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So if I have the word la'iba, and I put on maf'al, it becomes what? Bismillah. La'iba.
Mal'ab.
Mal'ab.
Mal'ab. And if la'iba means play, what does mal'ab mean? Brother Sunir, Bismillah. What does mal'ab mean?
Playground.
The
It
place of
means the
play.
place of play. It means the place of play. So if la'iba means play, then mal'ab means the place of play. And if qama means stand, then I have the word maqwam. 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 Now, weak letters in Arabic is like a whole long story. But one of the qualities of Arabic is that when I have this kind of thing here, I have maqwam, which generally is the qaf strong or the waw strong? Which one is strong? Which one's weak?
The qaf
The
is
waw is
strong.
weak.
Cough is strong. Wow.
Qaf is strong and the waw is weak. So generally what happens is we actually want to give the strong letter the haraka, and the weak letter must get the sukun. So if you do that, it becomes what?
Ma
If you-
maqawmun.
It becomes maqawmun. It becomes maqawmun. You don't have to understand, you can just watch it. I don't know how to explain some of these things sometimes. Maqawmun. Now in Arabic, does this qaw sound right? What weak letter normally goes with the fatha? A waw, a ya, or alif?
An alif,
Alif.
Alif, so it becomes what?
maqamun.
Maqamun. Okay. So maqam comes from maqam, which comes from maqwam, which comes from maf'al, which is a ismul makan. So after that long process, I'm going to ask you, what does maqam mean?
The place where you
The
stand.
place of standing.
The place of standing. The place of standing. So here we have maqama rabbihi. What does it mean? Maqama. What type of construction is it, first of all? Maqama rabbihi.
Mudaf ilayh.
مضاف إليه.
Mudaf ilayh. So I have to add a what? I have to add a the, and I have to add a
Of.
and of. So translate for me.
The place
The
of
place of-
the place of standing of his Rabb, his Lord.
Okay. So what do you understand by that?
Standing before your Rabb.
Okay. So before your Rabb, in other words, where is the place that you will stand before Allah?
Qiyamah.
Qiyamah, but where in Qiyamah? On the plains of Qiyamah. So the
Arafah.
plain on the plains of Qiyamah is the place which you stand before Allah Ta'ala. So that's going to be one of probably the main understanding of what is maqam rabbihi. Allah says, wa amma, as for the one that, wa amma man khafa, the one that fears what? Maqama, which is the maf'ul bihi and the mudaf, who fears the place of standing rabbihi, of his Lord, in other words, before his Lord. The place of standing of his Lord, he's going to stand in front of his Lord. He fears that place of accountability of standing before his Lord. That's going to be the one understanding. The other understanding is also going to be what? Maqama Rabbi can also refers to Allah standing. So what does it mean with Allah's place of standing? What do you understand by that?
As the judge,
Okay, so when you say Allah's place of standing, do you mean it literally or metaphorically?
Metaphorically.
Metaphorically, Allah doesn't have a physical place. Allah is beyond place and time. In other words, Allah's place of standing means Allah's station, Allah's position. Meaning what? Allah as the king, as the Rabb, as the Lord, as the judge, as the executor, as the decider. That's also in other words, the maqam can go back to Allah. In other words, Allah is taking the maqam. Allah has the station, or the maqam can go back to the abd. And both of those are applicable. وَأَمَّا as the one that مَنْ خَافَ, the one that fears مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, which is the more dominant one, the one that fears standing before his Lord. Or مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, the station of Allah Ta'ala, Allah standing in respect to the abd. وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and naha from the word nahi, he prevents nafsa, the self, the lower self, anil hawa, from hawa. What's hawa? Hawa is
Evil desire.
His own
Desires.
desires.
desires. And the idea here is that it's desires which is in conflict to Allah's will or in conflict to Allah's pleasure. The one that is able to naha is able to prevent his nafs, his lower self, anil hawa, from hawa. Fa innal jannata hiya al ma'wa. Fa, then indeed, undoubtedly, al jannah, the garden, which refers to the garden of paradise. Here, she, the garden, will be al ma'wa, will be the place of refuge and safety and the final abode for that person. So in the inshallah ta'ala, may Allah make us from those people that khafa maqama rabbihi wa naha nafsa anil hawa. And if we have any indiscretion, may Allah ta'ala forgive us, accept our tawbah, cover us, our honor and our dignity in this world and the next world. Allahu Ameen. And we'll finish the surah in next week's lesson, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام
وعليكم السلام ورحمة
ورحمة
الله
الله
وبركاته.
وبركاته. آمين.
everyone.